Charlie Albone and welcome to episode 1 of season 2 of That's How We Grow, in partnership with STIHL Garden Power Tools. Yes, just like your favourite annual, we are back for a second season. Thank you for all your positive feedback and reviews on our first season, which was actually our pilot season, not just here in Australia, but globally. And it was so well received that we simply had to come back to continue discussing gardening with all of you and some of our incredible guests. Speaking of our lineup for this season, it is very exciting. One of which I'm very excited to start chatting with in just a moment. She is, of course, Australia's own Samantha Armytage. Australia knows Sam for her time hosting Sunrise and many other programs, but a lot don't know she's just gone through a tree change and is trying her luck with an Australian native garden. A native country garden brings with it some beautiful, almost romantic thoughts for a garden designer like me. You've got so many opportunities to design a garden just for you. Space and access is rarely restricted, leaving the imagination to run wild. I can smell the fresh country air as I talk about it. I can see where my veggie plot is, where I plant my favourite trees, and so much more. But there can be challenges a country gardener must face that people in the city wouldn't consider. There's bushfires, a lack of water, and a range of animals that want to come in and feed on your garden, from cattle, horses, hungry rabbits, and even wombats. I can't wait to discuss Sam's beautiful garden and how she loves to get outside and embrace her country surrounds. Samantha Armytage, welcome to That's How We Grow. I have to ask you straight off the bat, are you a morning person still or no longer?
Well, good morning, Charlie. And Yes, I am still a morning person, but not a 3 a.m. person, thank God.
That would have been hideous.
Yeah, it was interesting because as soon as I left Sunrise and I moved to the country, I went straight back to normal sleep. I can really sleep in now till 6 or even 7, so that's quite good.
That would be bliss. I've got 2 young boys. Sleeping in till 7 would be a real treat.
I know. And after all those years of getting out of bed at 3 a.m., you know, everyone sort of warned me it'd do terrible things to your body clock, but I just bounced straight back to normal. But I do miss working and being productive, but I'm going back into, I'm doing Farmer Wants a Wife, I'm doing a bit of horse racing, so I'm doing things I really love. It's a fun time in my life.
Oh, that's good. And when you stepped out of Sunrise, you moved out to the country, is that right? Did they go hand in hand? So tell me a bit about that move.
Well, I was always a country girl at heart, and I spent my whole career, because I had to, in Sydney, because, you know, when you're a television journalist, you have to be in the city. You can't do that from home. So I had spent over 20 years, you know, I'd been to boarding school in Sydney, I'd been to university in Bathurst, so I'd kind of gone back to the country for that. And then I'd had to be in Sydney, and I used to do all these interviews as my star rose and people became interested, and I'd always sort of talk about going back to the country one day, and I didn't know how that was going to work for me, but I knew I needed to do that, and I needed to be able to put my hands in the soil. It's very important to me for my health and happiness that I connect with the earth, and that I get my hands dirty, and that I have a garden. And so then finally, you know, I met Rich, and he's a farmer and was living in the country, and then I decided to leave Sunrise and just all sort of work together. So I moved into his, but we're on 100 acres near Bowral, with horses and dogs and lots of kangaroos, a really big kangaroo population out here.
Yeah, there is.
Huge wombat population. There's a lot of native animals, and probably a little bit of control needed. But it's wonderful for me, and we'll get into it. But I have a different sort of garden now that I've married my husband and moved into his house. And can I just tell you, I have to just do a little shout out to you, a little fangirl thing. Right. Rich is a very big I'm a very big fan of you and what you do in the garden. Richard is a very big fan of STIHL. And
is he? Good man.
And yes, I just have to add this in here. He, all of his gear, the whippersnipper that I refuse to use, and all of the garden equipment is STIHL. And I love, it's all the battery stuff. It's so great these days because I love the leaf blower. I don't even use a broom anymore. So
he's moved to battery? Because you find on a larger property, some people are still stuck on petrol-powered stuff. But I think battery's the way to go for sure.
No, I think battery's the way to go for too. And if you can have one on the charge and one in the machine. And because we have the stables as well, so you've got some really heavy-duty blowing to do with a leaf blower down there. And so he bought this big STIHL one that I really love to now.
Yeah, it's addictive, isn't it?
It is. It is. And you literally, I mean, I remember as a kid just watching Mum with the broom on the veranda every day, you know, and now I just think, oh my God, who are you kidding with the broom?
So what was your garden like in the city compared to your garden now?
Well, my city garden was very, very minimal. I was living in a house in North Bondi, and I did the best I could it was on that sandstone plateau under the cliff in the north of North Bondi. So you couldn't really grow much. And when I inspected it, it had AstroTurf in the backyard. I thought, oh, God. But, you know, it was sandstone. You know, there was nothing that was really going to grow out there. So I did little things that you can do in the city, like I did pots. I did a lily-pilly hedge along the front mainly for privacy. But even doing that, you know, even watering something like that, having, you know, hedging that, having it there, keeping it green, keeping the bugs off. I just love pottering, but it was very low compared to some of the gardens you've done. It was very low maintenance.
Well, it's so difficult to grow in Bondi because you've got the salty air, you've got terrible soil, and it's really small. So your plants are stressed out and you're constantly battling stuff. So it's not ideal for a gardener. Great place to live, but not ideal for a gardener.
Look,
did you look
great.
After that place?
Yes.
Yeah.
because I kind of enjoyed it. I mean, I used to think I should get someone in to do this professionally, but I just never did because I did like doing it. But you know, I think the garden you have sort of suits who you are at the time. You know, as a young single career girl, I didn't have a lot of time, and I'd grown up on the Monero down in the Snowy Mountains my mother was the most brilliant gardener. I've inherited it from her, although she was a lot better than me and a lot more knowledgeable. But I'd grown up with, you'll love this, English gardens. We just, you know, we lived at Bolero Station at Adamidity for 25 years, and we had a very English garden, which I now look back on and I think about the water that was poured into the English garden on the Monero, which is one of the harshest regions in the country. And then Mum and Dad, after 25 years, moved to the Riverina, to a property out past Wagga. And again, Mum cultivated an English garden. So it was all roses and lavender and, you know, ironically, now I've married a man with the surname Lavender. But
I was going to mention that, but you brought it up.
Isn't it perfect? My old mate Paul Bango sent me a message when he heard we'd got married. He's like, I love this bloke. I haven't met him, but I love him. But, you know, it was all gardenias and camellias and petunias and geraniums in pots. It was all colour. It was beautiful. Yes. You know, Mum had a row of mop-top robinias out on the back fence line, sort of hiding the ugly bits of the paddock, and, you know, clumps of silver birches and crab apples and Buxus hedges, for goodness sake, on the Riverina, which I know. Can you imagine the water?
It's a funny thing us gardeners do. You know, when you really want something, you just try and make it grow. Like I love Japanese peonies, can't grow them, but every year I try it. You know, just I know. Because. Well, this year it might be different. Yeah,
I know. Well, and that's the thing about gardeners is there's always hope, isn't there? and I get the guilt when I have to throw something out or I see it's dead or it hasn't worked. And I'm looking out the window right now at some pots that I've planted here near Bowral of bulbs that I'm just hoping for a bit of colour in spring, and they're not looking terribly healthy. So I'm not very good.
Wet. Yeah. Oh, well, you know, if you've got the desire for it, you learn, and you only learn through killing things. You know, and it makes
Charlie.
Great compost. You do. I've killed plenty of things. Don't feel bad.
Have you? Because
Absolutely.
I do worry about this, and I think how do I be better at this? And pots are hard because we've had as you say, we've had so much rain down here.
Yes. Yeah, with pots, if it's raining as much as it has been, you really need to get the drainage right. So you need to be able to get the water out of the pots, otherwise they just go all stagnant and horrible and smelly.
Great. Well, that's what I've got, stagnant and smelly. So
yeah, good. I'll drill some holes in the bottom, you'll be okay.
I'll get Richard onto that.
Yeah. So you moved from a small place in Bondi to 100 acres. What's the garden like on your 100 acres? Obviously, it's not 100 acres of garden, but...
No, gosh.
Yeah.
No,
nice?
Rich, my husband breeds horses, so we've got horses in the paddock. So it's a very... we are the western side of Bowral. So... Again, here's me, and you're going to love all of this because I just think in a former life I was English. You know, I love the Southern Highlands for the English gardens and the
Yes.
green. And I've met and married this man who lives on the western side who it's pretty harsh up here. We're on the ridgeline and this ridge was created however many million years ago by a volcanic eruption. So if you dig sort of several inches under the ground anywhere here, it's just rock.
Yeah.
So it's hard land and it's very native Australia. It's completely not what you think of Bowral. And I've moved into his home, which he has created beautifully, but he loves native gardens.
Right.
So,
but you say that with some sort of reservation in your voice.
Reservation, trepidation. It's taken me a long time. You know, when you love the man, you've got to love the garden.
Yep.
But I didn't know anything about natives and I find them quite, I'd never really been a huge fan. I never found them to be terribly attractive and given, you know, knowing what I grew up with. And so Rich has sort of created a house within a landscape, he calls it, and a parkland. So it's mainly plantings around. I suppose we have a couple of acres of house, what you would say was a yard and a garden, but it's not fenced. It's sort of a ha-ha going off the edge of the ridge line into the bush.
Yeah.
And just plantings around the place of snow gums, but, you know, old man banksias, Hardenberger clumps. So it's very, I have talked him into some white cedars around the place because I didn't know that they were native. I'd always loved white cedars and then I finally found out they were native. So I was like, come on, Rich, let's do it. You'll love it. It's native. So it's taken me a long time and there's still a lot I don't understand about native flowers and they're so clever. It's quite extraordinary to get to know them, how they regenerate themselves, how the birds react to them. It's been quite amazing.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm like you, I guess I'm used to an English-style garden and that's what I get attracted to. And natives is a completely different look. And I think you only really appreciate them when you spend some time with them, when you see the flowers, when you see how the birds interact with them, when they do all those amazing things. And they can be fantastic. And I love the idea that you've got a house in a landscape. That's a great way to look at a large-scale garden because a large-scale garden can be anything you want it to be, but to really have it settled into the landscape would be really lovely. I'll have to come and visit.
You're welcome. You and Juliet welcome any time, and your boys would love it because there's 100 acres to run around. And it's terrific here because we have friends down from Sydney. We just go down into the paddock and have a bonfire and have a glass of red. It's a really lovely lifestyle. And you're part of and this is where when I was invited on your podcast, I was jumped at it because I want to pick your brains. I want to try and merge. It's the way of the future in this country. We can't have English gardens in a country that, I know we're in the middle of La Nina Mark 3, but, you know, normally we have no water. So we just can't do English gardens the way we have. So we have to embrace natives. But I like the idea of a formal garden.
Yep.
So I want to try and work out a way that you can have native gardening, but in a formal sort of, I love avenues of trees. I love hedges.
Yes.
And there's got to be a way to do that.
Well, look, I don't think it needs to be strictly native. So it just needs to be drought resistant. So hedging, you could use something like Teucrium, which is a silverleaf foliage and makes a fantastic hedge. That will give you lovely, and consistent throughout because I think that's really important. Avenues of trees, you do need to pick sort of your native trees and pick them for shape. But there's so many that are being developed for exactly what you're talking about. If you think of the water gum Tristaniopsis, there's a variety called Luscious, which is white-stemmed, white trunk, black stems, really glossy leaves and a very conical shape. So it's perfect for that sort of thing. Lovely. Yes.
Yeah. I had, we have a terrific nursery down near here called Warrior Pindi and he prunes, I guess pruning is the word, but he literally does it with a chainsaw, which the country girl in me loves. His white cedars, he pulls them right back. So each year they sort of almost ball. Yes. And I think, almost like a topiary. And I think, how cool I love people that think like this, that sort of take what things could be and turn it on its head and make it a bit different and a bit structured,
That just have a bit of fun with it, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you been to Red Cow in the Southern Highlands?
No, I've read about it, but I haven't been there. But
that is an amazing garden. amazing.
Is it? I'm writing
Yeah.
all this down because I do find we have a distinct lack of good nurseries down here. You know?
Well, I think the nursery trade has really suffered throughout COVID because they thought they got rid of a lot of their staff, thinking, doom and gloom. But then everybody got into gardening. Everyone really got their hands dirty and went and bought all the stock and completely emptied all the nurseries, and they just couldn't keep up. So it's something is really suffering in business, and supply and demand isn't there. But finally, I think they're starting to catch up. So thank goodness all the gardeners will get their plants.
I know. Well, it's like everything these days. You go shopping for something, pots or whatever, they look at you desperately and say, supply chain issues, we can't get these in. But, it's frustrating. And it is. It's interesting to see the different way that people are changing how they live, the boom in the regions and not just we're basically an extension of Sydney down here. But, I know Dad out at Wagga. Wagga is just... Every
booming.
time you visit, there's another suburb on the outskirts. It's extraordinary.
Yes. Yeah. It's nice the way you say you use your garden. It is a lifestyle change, isn't it? Just being able to go down to the fire pit, have a fire, be drawn out into nature, connect with nature. That must be really lovely compared to a tiny place in Bondi.
Oh, it's just... at the risk of sounding like an idiot, it just makes my heart sing to be able to walk outside the door. It's so important to me to be able to potter around and just create. And I've had fun with this because this is where I live now, so you make the most of it. But I've sort of introduced this idea to Richard that there's areas of our garden which was sort of just like a corner of the paddock that no one went to. There's a beautiful tree there or something, but there's no reason to go there. So I've put a little garden seat under that gum tree that looks out over and we sit down there and have a gin and tonic. And Rich said to me one day last summer, oh my God, I would never have come and sat down here before. I was like, Rich, if you build it and they will come. If you put chairs in the garden or if you put a swimming pool in a certain area, people will go and use that area. It's amazing how people love being outside.
A lot of people in Europe are having a look at the way they design their gardens and putting their alfresco areas away from the house. In Australia, we tend to people are all about indoor-outdoor flow and having the outdoor kitchen right by the back door. But if you put it at the back of the garden, it transforms the way you use the space. You have to travel through the garden to get there, and you will. And it means you use the space. And that doesn't matter how big your garden is. People, like you said, you build it and people will come.
Well, for instance, Mum and Dad's property out near on the Narandra Road, there was one particularly sort of ugly back corner. And there was an old cubby house that, the previous owners had put down there, but none of us ever went. We were too old for that by that point. And it was full of snakes. And you wouldn't have gone into this cubby house anyway. And see, that's the other thing we need. Snakes are the biggest turn off to country living is the snakes. But Mum put a swimming pool down in that back corner and then we'd all just go down and sit there. You'd take a drink down there, you'd lie down there, you'd read a book down there. And, even Mum was the one that sort of drew my attention to this, that she was like, we would never have come and sat down here if it wasn't for the swimming pool. And we were on the Murrumbidgee River, so we had a water view.
You had a big swimming pool.
Well, you had a water view of sorts.
Yeah.
The property was called Como and Mum used to call it Lake Como when it flooded, which Wagga's flooding right now. But build it and they will come. So I love doing that. I love using the garden. I love being in the garden. I love being productive. And then if the weather's right, which it often isn't down here, but, I love taking a book out there or a magazine or sitting on the phone out there.
It's the best place to relax, get some sun on you. It's fantastic. Do you get your love of gardening from your mum, you think?
Yes. Well, Dad was a farmer, so he loved the earth. And, he made his living from nature and the earth. Yeah. But Mum had the absolute knowledge. Mum was one of she wasn't like you because she wasn't a professional, but she could tell you the names of them and then the Latin names of everything. Yeah. And I used to think, how does she know this extraordinary knowledge? I guess it's like country cooks, they can make a dinner party out of the pantry.
Yes.
Country gardeners are the same. You just sort of teach yourself. You know what you love. I guess over many trials and droughts and floods and insects are. We forget about how much damage insects can do, particularly off the back of the wet weather we've had. The insects are just insane at the moment.
Yes,
Well, not at the moment,
absolutely.
but they'll come back in summer. But the destruction, I sort of still have that country girl thing in me that if I step outside and I see a grasshopper on the back veranda, I think, oh God, it's a plague. The garden will be devastated. The fear that these insects can put in you is terrifying. But yes, definitely from Mum. Mum was absolutely brilliant at this.
Yes, I get my love of gardening from my mum as well. She recently, she's been out from England. She just went home over the last couple of days. So it's been so nice to be out in the garden with her. You get a lot from that, being outside with loved ones. It's nice.
It's lovely to pass it down through generations and get their experience. What does she think of Australian gardens?
She thinks they're very hot. She gets very hot and red-faced. She really does. She's starting to appreciate them more. She loves all types of gardens, which is good. And I tease her because her pruning is atrocious. She turns all my lovely, perfectly rounded, sculpted buxus balls into cubes. So she's not allowed. She's not allowed to prune anymore.
At least she's having a go. But this is, Rich and I recently went to London for a couple of weeks. My sister lives over there just for a holiday. And just to be back just to travel again, but to be back in London particularly, and we went out into the country to the races as well, but the parks in London, and again, my heart just sings. I just walk through, Green Park and it was just Hyde Park. They just do parkland very well, the English. We could learn a lot from them.
I think that comes from the age of the trees that are in the parks. They've got these amazing old trees, and I think that's what you get from a country property as well, the maturity, which is really lovely. You don't get the verdant green in Australia as you're doing, but that's okay.
It's a particular shade of green. But trees, funny you say, I haven't mentioned trees yet. I adore trees, and we have some spectacular gums on our place here. And it's fun. I mean, Rich, who's, a bit older than me and was a farmer for a long time, and he's very, very knowledgeable about, he's big on pasture regeneration and creating a good, and obviously we have horses, so he wants to, have his grasses as good as he can have them, because then you save on hay costs.
Yeah.
But when I moved in here, we'd walk around together and I'd say, isn't that a spectacular tree? And he'd go, I don't know if it's a boy thing, go, oh, yeah, I'd never noticed that one before. It's like, that is just, look at it, it's magic. We have some really majestic gums on this place, and,
they're like living sculptures. And I think sometimes if you live with something for too long, or you only start to appreciate something later in life, you can forget about them. They can just be a backdrop. So,
well, they're just there, yeah.
Yes.
But
do you light them up at night?
We have one. Yes, there's one near the house that I'm just because we've had so much rain down here, and now we're having these enormous winds in from the south that we can tell when it's snowing in the mountains from the wind we get here. And I am a bit worried we might lose a few because the ground is so wet. But there's one near the house that is spectacular that I have lit up. I'm very capable, Charlie. I really do get out and have a go.
Good.
I'll ask Rich to do things for me around the garden and the house. And, if I ask him 20 times and it's still not done, then I just do it myself,
So do you do a lot of the maintenance around the property in the garden? Or are you a delegator?
Well, a bit of both. But I wouldn't say, I draw the line. I'm going to confess this to you, Charlie. I draw the line at whippersnippering. When Rich and I first got married, I said, you just need to know I will love and not obey and honour, but I will not do the whippersnippering. I just won't do that. But I do the mowing, and I love pottering in my garden. And Rich did, for my birthday, Richard made me some beautiful he's got these stringy bark timbers piled up, and he made me some vegetable garden boxes.
Right.
And, I'm lucky that he's got the equipment. He's got a bobcat and stuff, so he can put the soil in.
Yes.
So in that regard, I delegate. But I'm very capable. I really will. I move pots around. I get out there and have a good go.
Have a go?
Yes,
yeah, good.
Very
so
much.
What, are you into the pruning and that sort of stuff, or is it more secateurs and...
Both. I love pruning because I'm a Virgo. I'm a earthy girl. I love to get in and get it. I love to create order out of chaos. That's why I need to be in the garden because I'm such a Virgo. So, yes, I love pruning. And actually, funnily enough, speaking of mothers, Mum, these things that your mother hands down to you that at the time you sort of think, oh, Mum, I don't care. I'm a career girl. Like, she taught me how to prune a rose. And thank God she did, because now she's gone, and I every time I now do Dad's for him and I do mine here. And I think I'm quite a good pruner of roses. And Rich has created some under my direction, some hedges at the front gate, and I think they're callistemon, I think.
Yes.
And we're trying to grow those into a hedge. So, you could give me advice on this, actually. I like to prune because then I think things grow faster.
Well, pruning promotes growth. So with callistemon, you need to wait till they finish flowering and then chop them back by about a third. So be really hard with them and they'll bush up really densely and you'll get a really good display, and that will give you a quick hedge.
Okay.
So you can be quite harsh with them. Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah, you really can.
But it's scary, isn't it, when you don't really know what you're doing? To prune something by a third, you think, oh, my God, am I going to kill it?
Yeah, as a rule of thumb, most things can be chopped back by about a third without doing any damage.
Wow. So we're still getting frost. We've had a funny winter because it's been, I was just thinking the other day, it's been quite mild, but then we've had, I reckon we have a frost a couple of times a week. So it's still pretty cold here.
It's a different type of gardening when you're introducing frost, especially when you're doing planting and things like that. So when you're planting, you really need to ensure when you put the plants in the ground that you compact the soil around the root ball. Not compact it, but make sure the soil is in contact with the root ball, because any air pockets will fill with water and turn to frost, and that can kill a plant pretty quickly. So I wouldn't be planting anything until middle of spring, just to make sure the last frost is gone.
Yeah. Okay. See that, and we're quite late to it. It's just totally different from Sydney, and it goes without saying that every area you live in is going to be different. But I remember my childhood near Armytage where, our spring would start in about December, and then it'd go for about 2 weeks, it was just so hard. So I sort of still have that mentality. I mean, the Southern Highlands is not far behind that, but it's, I go to Sydney all the time for work, and it can be 10 degrees warmer up there, and it's an hour up the road.
I know.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I've got a place an hour and a half north of Sydney, and the temperature change is crazy. We still get frost, but it's so much warmer up there, so we can grow so much more. It's great. We've
had so much rain over the last sort of 12 to 18 months and the heat has still been there. So I said to Rich the other day, I can see before my eyes young trees that have grown several feet, in last summer. It was extraordinary.
Well, this spring is going to be ballistic growth, really, because we've had all that weather and it's going to be nice, all that rain, and we've got all the heat coming, so stuff's going to take off, and it's going to catch a lot of people off guard, I think. So you need to be prepped and ready to go with all your maintenance. But have you got any advice for those people that have done a tree change like yourself? Because so many have after the pandemic or are thinking about it still.
And Charlie, interesting you are, because I'm just heading back into television and I'm helping out on Farmer Wants a Wife. So I'm helping all these mainly young women who are thinking about moving to the country for love, like I sort of did. And my advice, I think country people are very self-contained, and luckily I grew up with this. So to come back to it was natural and wonderful for me. But you do have to be self-contained. You really, I think gardeners are special people because they're quite happy with their own company.
Yes.
And they're quite happy in nature. So I think there has to be a connection to nature. You have to expect that, the Wi-Fi is not great. You can't order Uber Eats. It's going to be a harsh is that's probably too harsh a word, but it's not as cushy as the city, really. And the peace and quiet is wonderful, but sometimes, it can be lonely.
It can be deafening. Yeah.
Well, yes. Sometimes you crave the noise. So if you can balance it a bit. But honestly, I mean, it's just such a wonderful lifestyle. And I'm not even talking like really out of town like us. I mean, even sort of around Wagga for young families, just to be able to have, 1,000 square metres on a block in Wagga is wonderful. It's a great place to raise children. It's great for, I look at Banjo, the Labrador, and if I have to put him in the car to go back to Sydney, and you can see his little face going, no, I don't want to go back. He just loves it. He will just go out and sniff around, chase a kangaroo, and So it's just a wonderful place to be.
You mentioned you had a lot of kangaroos. How do you keep the animals and the horses, for that matter, out of the house garden?
Well, the horses we can keep out. Rich has just done a whole lot of fencing here because he's got brood mares, so he's got foals being born. I mean, spring here is spectacular, not just for the growth. We have baby foals. It's just so divine.
Life everywhere.
Oh, it's wonderful. And as a September baby, I love spring. But the horses are okay. The native animals, I mean, there just is no way. You just can't keep them out. So you've got to work with them or around them. And they do a lot of. Actually, I think we have a couple of hares in our garden, and they do the most. They have stripped the white cedars this winter, and that's pretty devastating. We have lots of tree guards up here, but you do the best you can. Yeah,
absolutely. And hares are so difficult to keep out. With larger animals, you can keep them out with spiky plants, Berberis, Pyracantha, stuff like that will keep them out, but hares will still get through that. And they're after that fresh new growth, which is devastating if it gets taken out of a plant. You can try things like chili and garlic spray, but on a large-scale property, you'll be soaking everything in chili and garlic every couple of days, especially with the rain we've had, Can
you imagine? I have more time on my hands these days, but I don't know if I have that much time. But it is, look, you would know this. Gardening can be heartbreaking. You can literally come out one morning and think, oh, my God, what happened here overnight? Yeah. And I've always blamed the kangaroos, and it was Rich that said, I think this is a hare. Like, I just don't think a kangaroo would strip something. And then you've got the wombat issue. We have a lot of wombats down here and big ones.
Yes.
And they will just plough. They'll snap things off. You can tell where the damage has come from because the wombat will just snap it off because they've walked over the top of it.
Yeah, they don't care. They don't care if it looks nice. They just walk through it. They're after the grass.
They're like the Labrador. They'll just barge through. But a hare will strip things. The kangaroos, look, I don't know. I was talking to some friends who live further out west, and they've got a real deer issue out there. We have, I've never seen so many kangaroos in my life as I have here and lately, and I don't know what the answer is, but I do think the population is out of control, dare I say it.
Yes.
And big, even Rich said it the other day, big kangaroos. Like I've never seen, we had a huge buck who came in right in on the veranda, and he would have been taller than Richard. He was over 6 foot.
Wow.
And massive, like big across the chest. Like they're scary when they're that big.
They are.
And dangerous, especially with dogs, And he actually, it was sad, he came in here to die. He died on our veranda. So he was sick. But you sort of think, gosh, if he was well...
Yeah, he could eat the whole
bloody
garden.
Scary, I know. And he could, he'd literally rip the Labrador apart. So I don't know what the answer is, but it's a big population. I do think it's bigger than I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Do you have, you mentioned you had a ha-ha wall. Do you find that effective? Is that for the horses or for the kangaroos?
Well, that's because we're on the top of the ridgeline. Richard, I love ha-has. I think Richard accidentally created that because when
Perfect accident.
I know, I was like, oh, I love a ha-ha. And he's like, what? But because we're on the ridgeline, it just makes sense not to put a fence there. And our fencing down here is Southern Highland, it's post and rail, and where the foals are, it's horse wire. Yep. But around the garden, we really don't have a fence. So you could just tell where the garden begins and ends by where the mowing is.
Yes.
And so that just runs to the edge. And I mean, the Virgo and me, I'd like to go out. I'd like Richard to go out because I won't use the whippersnipper and just sort of trim it a bit. But he loves it. He really, this is where we don't always see eye to eye.
Okay.
He loves that wild, raw, untamed, native Australian look, and I like things to be a bit more neat and tidy.
But you can have the neat and tidy around the house, and then it bleeds out into the natural landscape. Is that sort of a compromise you're working? Well, that's sort of the compromise.
Yeah. Marriage is all about compromise, right, Charlie?
Absolutely.
But look, I love a ha-ha. I love. When I was growing up near Adaminaby, we had one in the garden, and it was to keep the sheep out. So that was a practical one, and that was borrowed from England. Mum would have asked Dad to create that. So that was practical. But this one here is sort of just a necessity.
Yeah, but they're a lovely way to take in the view and have it uninterrupted.
Oh, it's gorgeous. It's a really great way to do it. But you don't want your friends to come and have a party and fall over
and not know what they are. No. Where have they gone?
I know. We don't want anyone falling down the cliff here. But, as long as if they're well lit or, it's such a great concept. There's so many cool design. This is what I love about gardening. It's such an outlet for creativity. There's so many cool ideas.
Yeah, and having a large property, you can kind of try a bit of everything as well, which is nice.
And I have to say, I live here in the Australian bush, but I look at the Chelsea Garden Show and I look at what you do all the time and, and you guys on Better Homes and Gardens, and I think, oh, I love that. I love Graham Ross. I listen to all his tips on pruning.
He is amazing. He's got a photographic memory, so he remembers every single plant he's looked at. So he told me a tip he used to take pictures of plants, and when he would take the picture, he would repeat the name out loud, and he remembers every single plant. He's like unbelievable.
Isn't that extraordinary?
Yeah.
He's like the Bruce McAvaney of gardening.
Absolutely, he is. He really is. He's such a legend. He does so much for the industry. He's amazing.
Yeah, brilliant. But honestly, I've watched your Chelsea. I mean, I've never been to Chelsea Garden.
Have you
Chelsea, not? Garden Expo, and it's on my bucket list. It is really, I'd love to be there for that. We missed it this year, but maybe next year. Yeah,
it's the first social event of the calendar in London. We're going to try and go back next year. So, I mean, it's such an amazing place just to be. You're there for 3 weeks building this thing that stands up for 5 days, but to be around all these people that are like-minded and the creativity it's really incredible. So, you have to go.
It's very special. I know you've done. It's on my bucket list, and I admire you for being part of that, because that is quite a feather in your cap.
Yeah, I didn't realise what I was getting into, to be honest. I thought that'd be fun, and then I got there and I was like, oh. Yeah.
Well, it didn't look like that, It looked like you knew exactly what you were doing.
I had been there a few years before, but actually doing something yourself is a completely different experience. We've just come off the back of the Com Games and the Olympic Games and all that stuff. And I think that about the athletes, they train so hard, and when they're there, they really have to turn it on, don't they, for that short period of time.
Pressure.
And the pressure is...
but also being out of your own environment. It's like moving to, I used to know, even in Sydney, and I always loved when I was living in Sydney full-time, just creating a little community around myself. I always knew my dry cleaner, and I knew my shoe guy, and, and I knew the people at the garden centre. And so coming down here to live, I've sort of had to create that little community again, find, I think it's really important when you don't know what you're doing, like me, to seek out people who do, so you can get advice,
And gardeners, they love giving advice. If they've learned how to do it, they'll tell you how to do it. It's not like, they're not trying to hide anything from you. They want you to succeed as well, which is what I love about it as well.
It's very generous. It's lovely. Yeah. I love it.
And you've been really generous with your time, Sam. Thank you so much. It's been great having you on, and keep doing what you're doing. It's amazing.
Oh, well, thank you, Charlie.
The inbox has been filling up over the break between the series, and there are lots of community questions for me to answer, so I'm going to jump straight into it. Well, Tess from Montrose, from an outer suburb in Melbourne, has emailed through a question. She says she's got wild rabbits trying to get into her garden, and she might even have a deer on her fence line. Do I have any tips to keep these pests out of her garden? Well, for the deer, you need lots and lots of spiky plants. I did speak with Sam about this, and I would suggest pyracantha, berberis, or even if you're in a warm area of Melbourne, you could try a bougainvillea. The bonus of that is you'll get the lovely flowers as well. For the rabbits, you need to make up a chili and garlic spray. Take a litre of water, put 3 chopped up onions in there, some garlic and some chili, and spray it onto your plants, and that should keep the rabbits at bay. Mel from Bowral has asked, she says, I love you, Charlie. And I love you too, Mel. The check is well and truly in the mail. She's made a tree change and is loving country life, but she's moved to a newly built home on 2 acres and it has no garden. So how does she start and where does she start? Well, first things first, go out and buy my book. That will give you everything you need to know. And then make yourself a priority list. You need to work out exactly what you want from the garden and put it in order of importance to you. And then try and fit that into the space in a plan. You'll quickly work out if it will all fit, and if it doesn't, don't be afraid to get rid of the things on the bottom of the list. A garden with too much is almost as bad as a garden with nothing in it at all. Don't forget as well, soil preparation is key. Once you've done all the hard landscaping, make sure you get the soil as good as it possibly can be, and your plants will thrive. Do you have a gardening question you'd like me to answer? Well, send an email to charlie@stihl.com.au, and I'll try and answer your question across the season. I feel so lucky to have chatted with Sam today, and I love the way she's really embracing the natural landscape around her garden. She's not scared to seek out advice when it's needed, and she certainly does love battery power. The one thing that was really interesting for me is the way she's planning for the future and considering the weather, and it is amazing that she gets in and has a crack herself. Well, thank you for listening to That's How We Grow in partnership with STIHL Garden Power Tools. Do you need the tools to take on any garden challenge? Well, go to the STIHL website or head to your local STIHL dealer today. There are over 600 local STIHL dealers across Australia, and you can easily find your local STIHL dealer on the STIHL website. And on our next episode, we will feature Graham Collis from Evergreen Turf. He's one of Australia's preeminent turf growers. Graham works with a wide variety of leading sports venues to ensure they have amazing surfaces, from the SCG to leading golf courses. It's going to be great to speak to Graham about caring for beautiful lawns, and this episode will drop in 2 weeks' time. Don't forget to check out STIHL's blog with plenty of great gardening advice, as well as my key seasonal tips and tricks. And if you want to follow us as well, go to the STIHL Instagram at stihl_au. You can follow me on Instagram as well at Charlie_Albone. And thank you for listening. Until next time, goodbye.